They say silence is peaceful. But for many seniors living alone, silence can also echo. Not with noise, but with memories, with questions, and sometimes with fears that no one ever dares to speak out loud. Every year, millions of older adults in the United States find themselves living alone, not by choice, but by circumstance. Retirement comes, friends move away, loved ones pass on, and before long, the house that once felt alive with laughter starts to feel too quiet. But here's the truth nobody wants to say. Living alone after 70 isn't just about independence. It's about survival, emotionally, mentally, and even physically. Meet Marjorie Hensley, a 68-year-old retired librarian from Portland. For most of her life, Marjorie was surrounded by people. Students, colleagues, her husband of 40 years, Thomas. But when Thomas passed away just before her 68th birthday, she found herself waking up to the kind of silence that felt almost heavy. The house was neat, her books were still perfectly alphabetized, but inside something felt misplaced, her sense of belonging. The first few weeks after his passing, she told herself she was fine. "I'm independent," she said. "I'll keep myself busy." But what she didn't realize was how slowly loneliness sneaks in, not with grand gestures, but in the smallest moments, like eating breakfast alone, or realizing no one had asked how her day went in weeks. And here's where the truth starts. Most seniors who live alone won't admit it, but loneliness affects the brain the same way hunger does. Studies from the University of California show that chronic isolation triggers the same stress hormones that physical pain does. It's not just sadness, it's biology. The human brain is wired for connection. And when that connection fades, something deep inside us begins to fade too. Marjorie started noticing little changes. She forgot small things. The grocery list she'd written minutes earlier, the name of a neighbor she used to chat with every morning. At first, she laughed it off, but soon the laughter became rare. And she's not alone. According to the National Institute on Aging, more than 1 in 4 seniors in the US live alone. That's roughly 14 million people, each one navigating their own quiet universe. Some thrive. Others slowly shrink into routines that no one sees. Marjorie's daughter, Claire, called from time to time, busy with her own family. "You should join a club, Mom," she'd say. "Get out more." But here's something you don't hear often. After a certain age, getting out isn't that simple. It's not just about willpower. It's about energy, mobility, and sometimes fear. Fear of falling. Fear of feeling out of place. Fear of being the oldest person in the room. And this fear, left unspoken, quietly becomes a wall, separating many seniors from the very world they helped build. But let's stop here. Because this isn't a story about pity. It's a story about awakening. One morning, Marjorie woke up and realized something strange. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed out loud. Not smiled. Laughed. And that realization hit harder than any silence. So she decided to try something new, something small. She started talking to the houseplants her husband had once teased her about. "You're looking good today, Fern," she'd say while watering them. It sounds silly, but that small act cracked the shell of isolation just a little. Scientists call this microsocial interaction, the tiny exchanges that remind our brain that we're still part of life. Whether it's talking to a plant, greeting the mail carrier, or chatting with a cashier at the grocery store, these micro moments of connection help restore emotional balance. Marjorie didn't know the science. She just knew that for the first time in months she felt lighter. But here's where the story gets even more interesting, and where most seniors don't realize what's happening inside them. Loneliness doesn't just affect mood. It affects health. According to Harvard's 2023 longevity study, seniors experiencing chronic isolation have a 29% higher risk of heart disease and a 32% higher risk of cognitive decline. And yet, we rarely talk about it. Why? Because society romanticizes independence, aging gracefully, doing it on your own, not being a burden. But those phrases, repeated over decades, become emotional traps. They make connection sound like weakness, when in reality, it's the very thing keeping us alive. So one day, while sorting through her old boxes, Marjorie found a stack of postcards from her college years. Messages from friends she hadn't spoken to in decades. Something in her stirred. She sat down, picked up her old pen, and started writing back, one postcard at a time. At first, she didn't expect anything. But 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a letter from her old roommate, Eleanor, who now lived in Arizona. It began with just 3 words. "I remember you." That moment, Marjorie said later, felt like someone opened a window in a closed room. It's simple, isn't it? We underestimate the power of remembering and being remembered. So if you're watching this and you live alone, or know someone who does, here's what Marjorie's story teaches us. Freedom doesn't mean isolation. Independence doesn't mean loneliness. And strength doesn't mean silence. The truth no one wants to say is that seniors living alone are facing one of the most invisible epidemics of our time. And yet, within that challenge lies something deeply human. The chance to rediscover purpose in the smallest acts of connection. Before we go deeper, tell us in the comments. Have you ever experienced that quiet kind of loneliness that sneaks up on you? What helped you through it? Because your story might just be the one that gives someone else hope tonight. 2 weeks after Marjorie sent those postcards, her mailbox became a lifeline. Every few days, a new letter arrived. Handwritten notes from people who still remembered the girl with the kind eyes from English class, the one who always carried extra pens for everyone. Each envelope was like a heartbeat, a reminder that her story still mattered. And as she read those letters aloud in her kitchen, something unexpected happened. The walls that once echoed with silence began to hum with warmth again. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was connection, the most powerful medicine no doctor can prescribe. Research from the University of Michigan found that seniors who maintain even minimal social connections, through phone calls, letters, or group chats, live up to 7 years longer on average. Not because of wealth or genetics, but because of simple, consistent human contact. But Marjorie's transformation didn't happen overnight. The truth about living alone is that loneliness is a rhythm. It ebbs and flows. Some days, she felt strong enough to dance to her favorite record. Other days, she barely had the energy to make tea. One evening, she looked out her window at the dark sky and whispered, "Is this it now?" That question, quiet, almost invisible, is one many seniors whisper at night. And yet, it's in that question that hope often begins. Because the next morning, Marjorie made a decision that changed everything. She was going to join her local library's volunteer program. Not as a librarian, she'd done that all her life, but as a storyteller for Children's Hour. The first day, she almost didn't go. The idea of walking into a room full of strangers felt heavy. What if they see me as just another old lady, she thought. But she went anyway. And when she sat down in that chair with 10 small faces staring up at her, something shifted. The first few words trembled, but then her voice found its rhythm. Smooth, warm, familiar. The children leaned closer. They laughed when she made the wolf's voice growl. They gasped when she whispered the princess's secret. For the first time in months, Marjorie wasn't thinking about her loneliness. She was living, fully, presently, joyfully. Psychologists call this flow, the state where we lose track of time because we're deeply engaged in something meaningful. For seniors, finding flow is essential. It protects cognitive health, improves emotional resilience, and reignites purpose. And purpose, more than anything, is what keeps us alive. Later that evening, Marjorie came home and looked around her living room. The same 4 walls, but they didn't feel like a cage anymore. They felt like a canvas. She began rearranging things, moving her husband's old armchair near the window, bringing in more light. She added small plants, photographs of her friends, and even bought a colorful rug online. It wasn't about decoration, it was about reclaiming her space. Researchers at Stanford have shown that changing our physical environment can dramatically shift our emotional state. A tidy, welcoming home literally tells our brain, "You belong here." Here's what most people never admit. Many seniors living alone stop decorating, stop cooking well, stop hosting, because deep down they feel no one will see it. But Marjorie's story reminds us that we don't create beauty just for others to see. We create it so that we can feel alive inside it. Weeks turned into months, and something remarkable happened. The loneliness that once defined her began to soften. Marjorie started walking every morning at the nearby park. She smiled at strangers. Eventually, those smiles turned into greetings. And those greetings turned into friendships. She met Harold, a retired postman who loved feeding the birds, and Lucille, a widow who walked her small poodle at the same hour each day. They began sharing coffee after their walks, laughing about small things: the weather, the latest news, the squirrels who always stole the birdseed. Tiny moments. But together they became the architecture of belonging. According to a 2024 study by the CDC, seniors who maintain even 2 regular friendships outside their home have 43% lower rates of anxiety and 35% lower rates of depression. It's not magic, it's connection. So, the next time someone tells you, "I'm fine living alone," remember, fine isn't the same as fulfilled. Marjorie learned that fulfillment doesn't come from the size of your home or the number of people around you. It comes from choosing connection over and over again, even when it feels easier to stay quiet. And here's where the story takes a turn. One morning, Marjorie woke up to a knock at her door. It was Lucille, holding a small cake with frosting slightly crooked. "Happy birthday, neighbor," she said with a smile. It was the first birthday Marjorie had celebrated with someone since Thomas died. And as they shared that cake on her porch, sunlight spilling over the plants, Marjorie realized something she wished every senior could hear. You're never too old to be seen, loved, or remembered. If this story has touched you so far, take a second to hit like. It really helps others find this video and reminds more seniors that they're not alone. And if you've ever been where Marjorie was, share your experience in the comments. Your voice could be someone else's turning point. As the weeks passed, Marjorie continued her volunteer work. Her letters with old friends became weekly rituals. Her small circle of new friends became a second family. And that's when she said something that stuck with me. When you start living for connection instead of just survival, the world gets colorful again. That's the truth no one talks about. As time moved forward, Marjorie's world continued to expand in ways she never expected. She had started from loneliness, a quiet ache that used to fill every corner of her home. But now every morning carried purpose. There was coffee shared with Lucille, laughter from the library children, and handwritten letters from people she once thought she'd lost forever. Still, one evening as the sun set through her window, she found herself sitting in that same chair by the window, holding an old photograph of her and Thomas, her husband. For the first time in years, she didn't cry when she looked at it. She smiled. Because grief never truly leaves. Softens. It turns from pain into gratitude. Gratitude for the time shared, for the love that once filled the home, and for the fact that she can still remember. Experts call this emotional reframing, when we begin to reinterpret loss not as an ending, but as part of our ongoing story. And this is something every senior living alone eventually learns. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering differently. Marjorie began journaling each morning. She called it her letters to tomorrow. In those pages, she wrote about her dreams, her memories, and even her fears, but always ended each entry with one thing she was grateful for. Some days it was simple, the smell of rain. Other days profound, that I can still make children laugh. It might sound small, but gratitude literally rewires the brain. Studies from Harvard and Berkeley have shown that seniors who practice daily gratitude report 25% higher emotional well-being, better sleep, and stronger immunity. It's proof that even when you live alone, your thoughts, your words, your daily choices still have the power to transform your life. But the story doesn't end there. Marjorie's renewed energy inspired her to do something brave. She started a small neighborhood book club. It began with just 3 people sitting around her kitchen table, sipping tea and reading short stories. Then word spread. Soon the group grew to 10, then 15, until they had to move it to the local community hall. People of all ages came, from retired teachers to young college students looking for a sense of belonging. And Marjorie, the woman who once felt forgotten, became the heart of it all. One evening, a young woman named Claire asked her a question that paused the entire room. "Miss Marjorie, how do you handle being alone for so long?" Marjorie looked around the room, at the faces smiling back at her, and said quietly, "Darling, I'm not alone anymore. I just live alone." That sentence captured what millions of seniors need to hear. Living alone does not mean being lonely. It becomes loneliness only when we stop reaching out, when we stop allowing others to reach in. Here's the truth that society rarely talks about. More than 30% of seniors above 75 live alone today. And while many manage fine physically, emotionally they're fighting invisible battles. Silence, disconnection, fear of being forgotten. But there's another side to this truth, a brighter one. Every senior has the power to rebuild their circle. Sometimes it starts with one simple hello. Sometimes with a letter. Sometimes with a story told at a library. Because connection doesn't come to us, we create it. Marjorie's story is not unique. There are thousands like her. In small apartments, quiet rural homes, city flats, waiting for life to feel alive again. Maybe that person is your grandmother. Maybe your neighbor. Or maybe it's you. If you're listening to this right now and you feel alone, please know this. Your story isn't over. There are people waiting to meet the real you. Not the version that hides behind "I'm fine," but the one that still has dreams, laughter, and a story worth telling. Start small. Write a letter. Join a local group. Say good morning to someone you pass by every day. It's in those tiny steps that life quietly blooms again. And if you have an older loved one living alone, check in. Call them. Visit. Ask them to share a story. Because sometimes, a simple conversation can save a soul from disappearing into silence. Weeks later, Marjorie's community hosted a day of stories, inspired by her book club. Seniors stood up one by one and told stories from their lives. Stories that had been waiting decades to be heard. There were tears, laughter, applause. And at the end, when it was her turn, Marjorie looked around and said, "The shocking truth about living alone is not that it's lonely. It's that too many of us forget we can still reach out." That night, after the event, she came home to her quiet house. She turned on her lamp, poured a cup of tea, and smiled as she looked around. Same walls, same pictures. But the energy was completely different. Because the house wasn't just a place anymore. It was a reflection of a full, connected life. And as she blew out the candle on her table, she whispered to herself, "I'm still here. I'm still growing. I'm still loved." If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, someone just like Marjorie needs to hear it too. You're never too old to start again. You're never too forgotten to be remembered. And you are never ever truly alone. Remember, every day is a new chance to reconnect, to live, and to love again.